Hey everyone, and welcome again to this week's episode of the Intentional Life Podcast. I'm AJ Selby, and this is my wife,
Amy Selby.
And as you can see, we have our very first guest here on the podcast. And this is my uncle. This is Donavan Grant. And Donavan is actually a licensed clinical mental health counselor. And you've been in your field for about 20 years. And guys, we wanted to bring him on the podcast because we just want to give a disclaimer here that if you do listen to this podcast with your kids, you might not want to listen to this one with your children around. We're going to be talking about the topic of domestic violence and how to recognize it, navigate it, and get out of that situation. And so just want to give that disclaimer here at the front. But we think this is a really important topic to cover as it's important to talk about, as well as I don't know that it's discussed enough within Christian circles and within the religious community, and I think this is a really important topic. So just want to give that preface up front. If you listen with kids, you might want to preview this one before you have them listen. So, anyways, Donavan, thank you so much for coming on and being the first guest on our podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. I feel so honored to be the first guest.
Yeah.
But you just found out you were our first guest like 2
I
minutes
know,
ago.
just like 2 minutes ago. I'm like, oh, I'm the first? Nice. All right. This is great.
And so, Donavan, tell us a little bit about how you got into this field that you're in.
Okay.
And what you've done over this 20 years of being a licensed clinical mental health counselor.
Sure. Well, I will tell you, I don't. It's really a calling. I didn't go looking for it necessarily. It kind of found me, and I think all therapists, we have our specializations that we work with. And I don't know, I can't speak for other therapists, but I can say like everything I specialize in, including domestic violence, it found me. I wasn't looking for it. But the short version is my nieces were in an after school program that my sister was working at. I don't know why I was over there one day and they said, "Do you want a job?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I like kids." So, and I was working with all these inner city kids, and it just became like, I think I'm going to pursue this. So I, started pursuing human services. There was a speaker there when I was in my undergrad in human services, and that was my major. And she was talking about domestic violence. She worked for the program that I now supervise. And she was talking about working with offenders, and I just became very intrigued by it and kind of really understood that so I could easily be one of these guys if I didn't have the opportunities and experiences that I have had. So I just really kind of, gravitated towards it. When it came time for internship, I had all this experience working with kids. So I was working with the children's program, the children's services. So I was working with all the kids that were witnessing the domestic violence, and I was working a lot with the survivors because it was the moms that I was talking to. And but I always had this connection with the offender program, and because I was talking with them a lot, my office was down there with the offender program, so I was interacting with them more because we were at the courthouse. That's where I was housed, and budget cuts, I started working for the offender program, and then in 2007 I became the supervisor of the offender program, and I've been there ever since. So a lot of you can see where God kind of like this happened with kids, and then went into this, and then offenders, and here's where and so my specialization really in domestic violence is working with offenders. But I'm fortunate, and it's rare for even people who work in this field to have witnessed with the survivors and the kids and the offender. But I've worked with the offender the most, so that's where my primary focus is. But
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Man, that's a lot of really, that really does have to be a calling, because I can imagine that there's a lot of what you have discussed and witnessed in your own interactions that's been really, really heavy. And I can't imagine that that's something easy. So thank you for the work that you do.
Oh, yeah,
and
absolutely.
Thank you.
Being able to help others as they navigate moving forward after those incidents, as well as being a part of the restoration that can happen.
Right.
which I imagine that you've seen some of, and that there are other times that it doesn't go that way. But um, I also wanted to touch on, was it early last year that you took on an additional new position by personal request of the mayor of Charlotte? Is that correct?
Actually, it was the governor, Roy Cooper.
Okay.
He appointed me to the Domestic Violence Commission, which is it's in Raleigh. That's we meet virtually, but that's where the meetings are held. And so basically, what that body does is they approve programs like the one that I supervise, because we're a state certified program. So they evaluate and assess programs that are providing services to victims and offenders. And so there's an approval process, and then statutorily we're charged with making recommendations and, coming up with initiatives that are going to best serve domestic violence survivors in the state of North Carolina.
Gotcha.
Wow.
So yeah.
Okay. And so, as you've been in this field for 20 years, and as you've continued to grow and come into new positions, I imagine you have a lot of insight across the board on when it comes to domestic violence cases. What are the statistics of domestic violence incidents that go reported versus unreported?
Well, I don't have any statistics about what's reported and unreported. Obviously, we don't know what's unreported, but we do know that it takes a lot for a survivor, and forgive me if I say victim and survivor, I'm talking about the same person, but we're really trying to change our language a little bit to call them survivors versus victims. It's more empowering. So anyway, that being said, a lot of survivors do not report for a long time because of safety. I mean, and plus there's this hope that, and I'm going to, when I talk about offender and survivor, I'm going to use male pronouns for the offender and female for the survivor, only because statistically, it's overwhelmingly male, and that just makes it easier for me to talk about.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So a lot of times the survivor, it's again, it's a safety feature or safety concern, and she has this hope that he's going to be the person that she married and the person that she sees sometimes who's a generally good guy. So she kind of holds on to that hope, because usually after there is an incident of violence, then he's remorseful and he's asking for forgiveness, but then it goes back into the same.
There's just like a cycle.
Yeah, kind of a cycle. It is a cycle of behavior, and so during that time, she kind of has some hope that he's going to change, and hope for who she wants him to be. Most survivors will tell you that the main thing they want is they just want him to change. It's not that they want him arrested. They don't want any of that. They just want him to change. And so, I mean, that's the biggest thing that we hear from them all the time when they come to court. But it takes a lot of courage to come to court, because calling the police is a big thing. They don't, again, it's like, oh no, he's going to get arrested. And then if the court system doesn't always work great for the survivor. And so we have seen in, situations where she takes out a restraining order against him, or she tries to, and the judge doesn't grant it. So now she's stuck in this situation. Now, what does she do? And, the offender can use that. Well, remember what happened last time you called the police. Okay. That didn't go so well, did it?
Yeah.
That's hard.
So yeah.
Throwing
So
it
it
back
doesn't,
in your face.
yeah. And unfortunately, you have some judges who are really wonderful and they really take the time to understand the dynamics of domestic violence, and others don't. And we have wonderful judges in Mecklenburg County who we're doing really well with that. But a lot of that is about the communication that we have with them. And in Mecklenburg County here in Charlotte, North Carolina, we have a pretty good coordinated community response, which anywhere in the country, the world that's dealing with domestic violence, you have to have a good coordinated community response, because I can't do all the work myself just working with the offender. I have to work with the people that are providing survivor services and the police department and the court system. Most of my clients are court mandated, so I'm in constant communication with probation and parole, because they're on probation, and that's part of the thing is like if you don't do this program, you're going to go to jail for this many days. So to come to the program. But again, it's all of those people working together. And I'm also on the domestic violence fatality review team here in town. And so what we do, and that's a team that consists of myself. We have people from the police department. We have a DA on there, a judge, survivors, the school system, the Novant and Atrium Health, which are the big healthcare systems here. So really everybody in the community is on that team.
Wow.
And we review homicide cases. And we try to make recommendations to our various entities that we represent. How could we have prevented this? What kind of policies or protocols can we implement? What can we learn from dissecting this case? And we get all of the records. We get the autopsy report. We get the police records. We get my records, if there are any, from everywhere. And we sit and review them. It's a day and a half of reviewing a homicide case. It's very draining.
Oh, I can only imagine.
But it's also very rewarding, that we can go through this. And it's a great team. We collaborate a lot. And the same, when we were talking about the Domestic Violence Commission, that's kind of the same thing. There's a lot of people, different representatives that are picked by the governor to represent different entities on that team so we can make recommendations to the state. So, yeah.
Gotcha.
I may have gone way off on what
No,
you
no.
were asking.
No, you're good. No, that's a lot of really, really great information. And so obviously much of the time that that it has reached the point where offenders and survivors have reached any point of interaction with you has been when it's reached a point of physical violence. But domestic violence can take other shapes and forms. What are some of the ways that you have seen domestic violence show up in relationships that isn't only physical, and how that changes over time, and how that may gradually ramp up and build up to the physical violence?
Sure. Well, domestic violence is about power and control. I mean, ultimately, and really abuse is always about power and control. Who has the power and how they wield it. So, and you can look at that in various different situations. There are plenty of people that are in power situations that abuse that power. So when you're talking about power and control, and again, most of the time, men physically, generally speaking, we're stronger, bigger. We may be the primary income source. So that gives us a lot of leverage and a lot of power in the relationship. So when you're talking, as you said, most of these people don't come to us until there's been a physical act of violence. And usually there's probably been other physical acts of violence, again, before it was reported.
Right.
But there was also a lot that happened before the physical violence actually happened. Because a lot of the physical violence, and there's a thing called the power and control will, which is kind of the base model of what all survivor and domestic violence offender services have used. And how that will was formed by a group of survivors in Duluth, Minnesota. It comes from Duluth, and they were just talking about their experiences and sharing, and then they were like, "Oh, I experienced that." So they found these commonalities in what the offender would do to them. And if you look at the wheel, you can Google it, but physical violence, sexual violence is on the outside of the wheel. And there's all these different spokes of other forms of abuse on the wheel. And when I'm talking to the community and or wherever I'm presenting, showing this, I always say that it's on the outside of the wheel because that's usually when the ante has to be upped to maintain the power, because the isolation hasn't worked. So I'll just kind of give you some overview of some of the other forms of abuse. I mentioned isolation. So, he may say, well, everybody's moving to Charlotte and there's job opportunity there. We're going to move to Charlotte. Well, all my family is in Tampa. So now we're in Charlotte by ourselves.
Yeah.
So she doesn't have family, friends that are close by that she can just go and, hang out there, or if she's in a dangerous situation. So that's just one way they might present it. But another example is, every time her friends call to go out, he will say something to the effect of, well, I thought it was just going to be nice to have the two of us together tonight. We're going to have a nice little romantic night together. But okay, if you want to do that. So she's like, okay, well, I'm going to cancel. And the thing is that she cancels all the time. So eventually the friends are like, I'm not calling her. And these are just some examples of ways that they cut those ties off. So there's not a connection to family and friends. Financial abuse is another big one. Again, you know, if I have the money, then that gives me some leverage in the relationship. You know, he may say things like, you don't need to work, I'll take care of you, which sounds really nice in the beginning. But then you realize, oh, I have no financial resources.
It's also like,
myself.
here, you get an allowance every week and I can control how much that is. It's not like we have a free flow. Like, I'm not working right now, but we have access to each other's accounts. Right. Like, if I need money, I can take money. But that's not what's happening in that situation.
You have a partnership.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's
not the same thing.
That doesn't happen in domestic violence. And I'm glad you said allowance, because that's one of the ways that they'll abuse the power is, I'll give you an allowance for anything that you need. We had a story years ago. There was a case where the offender would require the survivor to, when she went to the grocery store, she would have to have a cooler in the back of her car. So when he came home, he could go through the receipt and see everything that she spent, so he would know how much money she had left over. So isolation, financial abuse, using the children as another one. So they'll, you know, pass messages through the children, or, you know, talk bad about mom. There was a case years ago where when I was working with kids, the kid told me that, you know, dad would take him on errands to run errands. And basically the whole time was, what's your mom been doing all day? Who's she been talking to? And talking about, like, you know, how trashy she is or whatever.
That's so sad. That's hard.
So that's another form. And then there's things like that are probably, as you know, we talk about verbal or emotional abuse, and that's the name calling, the put downs, the those kinds of things, destroying property, which is, or that's a way of using intimidation. Because I punch a wall or I break something. I didn't hit you. I didn't say anything to you, but I sent a message. Look what I'm capable of doing. So, and just sometimes just using their physical presence, like, you see how much bigger and stronger I am than you. These are all forms of just using intimidation to kind of keep you in line. So what I want to say is, survivors are not these, sometimes the image is like they're these weak women, and that is not true at all. In fact, a lot of them are strong, educated women, and at times they start fighting back, and they do. And when that happens, or this tactic is not working as well as it did, now I'm going to get physical. Now I'm going to push you up against the wall. So instead of punching a wall, I'm going to push you up against it. Or I'm going to pull your hair. I'm going to hit you. And then, you know, get into the physical violence. So
you're losing the power. So you got to assert more power, essentially. Yeah.
Can I tell my frog story? Do you guys mind if I do that?
I don't know that I've heard
this.
Okay,
I'll tell
whatever story you want to tell, you go for it.
This is a story that I often tell when I'm talking about this in the community. But so this disclaimer: I would never hurt an animal. I love animals, so let me just say that. But so let's just try to imagine that, you know, I have one of those big soup pots, you know, to make soup in, and I have a pet frog, and I'm going to put this. In this pot, I'm going to put some nice, cold, clean, crisp water in it, right? I'm going to take my frog and I'm going to put him in the water. What do you think he does?
Enjoys the water.
He enjoys the water. Yeah. He likes it. This is nice. I like this. I can get down with this. So now I'm going to take my frog out of that. I'm going to put that pot of water on the stove, and I'm going to turn up the heat till the water is popping and bubbling and super hot. Now I'm going to hold my frog over that water. What do you think he does now?
Freaks out.
Yeah.
Freaks out. He tries to get away. It's like, this is dangerous. I need to get away. Okay, I'm pour that out. Let's start over. Put the cold water back in there. Put it back on the stove. Put my frog in the water. But now I'm just going to slowly turn up the heat. What do you think the frog does now?
Hangs out.
Hangs out. He starts to adapt. If it got, you know, hot in here or too cold, you know, you might want to get a sweater or something, or, you know, take off the sweater if you had one on. And this is something we kind of instinctually do. We don't think about it. And that's how domestic violence works. Because if he assaulted her on the first date and called her a name, well, there wouldn't be a second one.
Right.
But that's not how it happens. In fact, a lot of times these guys can be very charming, very charismatic. And so he can seem like a great, wonderful guy. So the first time he calls her a name after they've been dating for who knows how long, she's like, well, that's okay. He's having a really bad day. He's under a lot of stress right now. And she starts to adapt. And then before you know it, we're married. We have a couple kids. And what have I gotten myself into? So it is a slow, pervasive process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about this very slow process that things are gradually turned up, gradually ramped up. And then oftentimes there are things that lead up to when the police are finally called, or, things are finally reported. What is oftentimes the most common tipping point that you see where things finally take a turn for somebody to fully fight back with use of the legal system and to get, whether it's themselves or them and their children, out to finally make the right choice?
You just said it, the children. Yeah, it's always the number one reason survivors leave is for the kids. It's also the number one reason they stay.
Wow.
But it's usually something with the kids. I cannot continue to expose my kids to this environment, and I got to get out. Yeah, a lot of times it has to do with kids. Yeah.
And you mentioned it's incredibly difficult for me to imagine this and heartbreaking to think of, but you were telling that story about the dad that would take his child on errands.
Yeah.
How common is the weaponization of children in that way?
Well, it is a common form of abuse. It's on the power and control wheel. That's just an example. That's a case story I gave you, but it's on there, is that using kids, to manipulate. I mean, another thing that we'll see is like when she leaves or she gets a restraining order and there's some kind of custody thing. Here in Charlotte, we have a thing called Safe Visitation Exchange, which is a program under the department I work for. And it really provides like a safe, supervised place for them to meet, to exchange kids or have time with kids. Because before that existed, they would be meeting at like, a McDonald's parking lot or somewhere, right? And he would use that time. Well, here's my time. I've got a restraining order against me, but I've got this in place. So here's my chance to manipulate her, trash talk her, whatever he's going to do. So this area provides a safe place for that. But that's something that they would do. That's kind of common. But what I was going to say is a lot of times that we'll hear from survivors, now he wants custody of the kids. He never cared about the kids before. It was always, I take care of the kids. He was kind of hands off with the kids, but now he's fighting for custody. And what I have always tell them is like, because he's lost control. You're out of the house. You've got this order against him. You're safe. Maybe you're in another relationship. Maybe you've remarried or whatever. What control does he have over you anymore? Well, I still got the kids. I can still get to her through the kids. Maybe I can get custody of them, or I can use them in ways to talk about mom. And that happens frequently. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a different kind of rage that builds up in me when thinking about taking the honored role of being a parent and twisting it in a way to weaponize it against your spouse. I'm not going to go down. If I think about that too much, I'm just going to get really, really angry.
Yeah.
And as a part of this, Amy and I have, had several conversations with people that we've known that have been in DV relationships, and things like that. But when I spoke to you about that particular one previously, you shared a story with me about a case that you had where oftentimes the religious circles and religion often don't handle DV well, as well as the steps that are necessary to make sure that people are safe.
Yeah.
And so you shared a story with me about what love really looked like. And you asked a question to this lady about what about if she thought God would really want her to remain in this situation. Can you share that story?
Sure.
Again?
And I probably have several stories like that. But the one you're referring to, and I've heard that from several survivors about like they don't want to break the covenant of marriage. They don't want to get divorced. And again, remember what I was saying earlier about they have this. He's not like that all the time.
Yeah.
And they want him, if he could just change. So there's a part of that they hold on to. And that's what they really want. They don't want to leave him, but a lot of times they can feel like I'm breaking our covenant of marriage, or it's. And what I would talk to them about is like, but what is that covenant? What is it that your husband has promised you to do? What biblically is he supposed to do in that role? And what kind of promise did he make to you and to God when you guys were married? He's broken that. He's broken that promise, not only to you, but God as well. And I'm not saying that there can't be healing, because obviously there certainly can. But you staying in a situation for you that is unsafe for you is not what I believe God would want, just for the sake of the marriage. God does not want you. Love is not being abused physically, mentally, emotionally, all of those things. I was trying to think of the term that's gaslighting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just came to my head. Gaslighting is a big part of abuse.
Yeah.
All those things. God would not want you to be in that relationship. That is not love. That is not His example of love. That's not love. That's abuse. And he would want you to be safe. To not stay in that marriage. So I would say, if somebody is in that situation where they feel like they need to stay because of how God is going to view their marriage or them leaving, safety is always paramount. Always paramount. And I believe that's true in God's eyes too.
Yeah.
You're talking about what love is and what love is not. And the word tells us love is patient, love is kind. It is not selfish. It is not boastful. It keeps no record of wrongs. It goes on and on. We see multiple examples of what love is in Scripture. Nowhere in that description of what love is power and control a part of that. None of those individual components that make up what love is are a part of power and control. And so that example that you're providing, I think, is really key for people to see and to understand and to acknowledge that these two things can't coexist. Where there's one, you can't have the other. And that's really, really difficult. Amy and I, and unfortunately, we've had several conversations with several different people in scenarios that have found themselves in some form of an abusive situation. And it's always messy, especially from an outsider perspective, where you can start to see where things aren't lining up, where there are these alarm bells and whistles that are going off, that you can tell something isn't right. If there's someone that's listening that may know somebody or is recognizing some of these things, how can they more definitively recognize some of the indicators that somebody is in an unsafe in a domestic violence situation?
I would say, as an outsider, kind of looking into the relationship, pay attention to how, and again, how he would interact with her. Like, is he texting her all the time? Why didn't you call me back? I've been, is he blowing up her phone? Do you see his behavior towards her just seems a bit off? It could be a domestic violence. Maybe it isn't, but it could be. And, if talking to that friend and being, hey, here's some things I'm seeing. Here's some, and what I would often do when I worked with survivors is I would just say, tell me about your relationship. What's going on with your relationship? And if you have, or there's a trusted friend or somebody they can confide in you, you think that they will, that might be just a simple open-ended question. Tell me about your relationship. And what I would find with that, when I would say that to them, they would start going around the power and control wheel. And they would start saying, well, sometimes he is funny about how much money I spend, or he keeps me on an allowance. And sometimes he just gets really, angry, but he's having a rough day or what, all those kinds of things. Because they'll make excuses for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd watch out for that too. And when I would hear survivors start to tell me these things, and some of them would insist, I'm not in an abusive relationship though, because he's never hit me, and maybe he doesn't call me names. He might yell a lot, or he breaks things, but he's never done anything to me, things like that. But when I would ask them that, and they started telling me all these things, then I would show them the power control will. And it would be like, oh my gosh. I said, you are in a domestic violence situation because he doesn't have to hit you. You mentioned this and you mentioned that. And look at this. And that's an easy resource to find. But and there was a lot of those aha moments, like I never thought that I was in that kind of relationship.
Yeah.
And domestic violence is messy. I mean, it really is. And that's why a lot of people kind of shy away from it. It's not something that they really teach us as therapists, like when we're in grad school. That I think there was like a paragraph about it. And I mean, and the thing about it is it's so common. Some national statistics is 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence or sexual assault in their lifetime. So if you take a group of 20 women, you count off every 4. And I've done that in presentations too. Like we have a big group. It's like, okay, let's count off every 4th woman. And they stand. So all of these women
ends up being a big group.
Yeah, it ends up being a big group. So it is very common. And 85% of domestic violence is perpetrated by men. But there's the 15% that is perpetrated by women. We do have a women's group that of women offenders that we serve. So women can be abusive as well, but it is still predominantly men. But I think going back to your question is really kind of looking for some of those things I've talked about that may not necessarily be physical abuse that you're seeing, and just having kind of an open conversation about it. Like, maybe it is just, tell me about your relationship, tell me what's going on there, and see what they say. And you start seeing those kinds of things that are coming up, and again, expect her to minimize it, expect her to rationalize it and make excuses for it, but and even deny it. Or you might get where she's like, oh, this is what he's doing. You might get the whole other side of that spectrum as well. So, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also understand that, because when I started out with this and really working with survivors, I wanted to get them help. I wanted to make sure, here's how you get a restraining order, and here's how you do this, and here's these resources, which are all great and wonderful. But you also have to understand that the survivor is the expert of their own experience. So for whatever reason, she may not be ready to leave.
Right.
And you have to respect that. Here's information for you when you are ready. And that's really the best that you can do. Because, again, they're the expert of their own.
You can't force them into
you can't
helping
force
themselves.
Them. You can't force them. And the thing, too, for survivors, their choices are not really great. Because when you're in that situation, basically you have 3 choices. I can stay and adapt. I can take myself out, suicide, or I can leave and possibly be at risk for being murdered. Because when she leaves is also when it's highest safety risk. So if you think about those choices, and this is why we're always asked, well, why does she just leave? Why would you put up with that? Why don't you just go? Well, let's go back to what I was talking about earlier. Well, I've been isolated. I've got a couple kids.
So who does she go to?
No money. So I got no resources, no money. No, where am I going? And when I leave, he's going to come after me. So again, none of the choices are great. We do encourage them to protect themselves, but that doesn't necessarily always mean leaving. Sometimes it does mean staying, and maybe he gets sent to a program like mine, and we work with him, and we do see great change in these offenders. And, we're talking about the offender, and I want to just be clear here, is when we're talking about his behavior, and we're talking a lot about his behavior. When you're talking about the behavior, it's really terrible. It really is. And it's easy, you know, AJ, you're saying I'm getting angry, and of course you are, because it's hard to hear these kinds of things. I want to humanize the offender for a minute, because all the guys that we serve and women that we serve, they've all experienced some kind of trauma. And remember what I said earlier, that I recognized when that speaker came to my college, I could be that guy. I've just been blessed to grow up in a family where I had healthy relationships modeled for me. I had, you know, different experience. I wasn't abused, but, you know, a lot of the men that we work with have come from that. And their partners have, even a lot of survivors have some kind of trauma too. Not all of them do. But they recognize, survivors a lot of times will recognize what they see in him. They know, okay, well, he does have this kind of bad past. His dad was abusive to him, or his mom was, or there's a lot of domestic violence and substance use and stuff in their home that was bad. Anyway, all that being said is that there's a lot of trauma that they're experiencing, and a lot of times we have to get to that to kind of break that down. And they put on, especially men will put on kind of this macho facade of not talking about it. They minimize the violence, because they really don't want to admit that they're a wife beater. No guy wants to admit that they're doing that, or they're abusive to their wife. So they minimize it. They'll blame her. Everything's her fault, and you know, she's crazy, or she's this or that, and you know, she knows how to push my buttons. That's a famous one we hear all the time. She knows how to push my buttons. And it was like, well, probably she does know how to push your buttons, but you still made a choice to be abusive,
right?
So it's a choice that you're making. But yeah, I always, when I'm talking about the offender, and we do talk about these behaviors, but just to kind of understand, like I said, to humanize the offender a bit, there's a lot of experiences that he has had throughout his life as to why he's making these choices. Now, it's still his choice to make them.
Right.
So he has to be held accountable for that. That's very important. You're accountable for that behavior, but you can kind of understand a little bit better when you hear some of their experiences. And there's stories that I've heard terrible from offenders, and you start to understand, okay, well, I can see why you think this is not okay, but that you make some of the choices that you do. Yeah.
I think that's a really good thing to point out, because it is easy to just blanket view people, like, you know, with that offender title, which I mean, obviously that's necessary in the kind of work. You can't name everybody by name, but it's to be like, okay, there's still human beings in there. They're still human, but like you said, it doesn't excuse their behavior, but it does explain their behavior. And I think that probably allows, I'm just assuming for you as someone who's trying to help them work through that, probably helps you have some compassion for them.
Absolutely.
And be like, okay, how do I really get through to you as a person, and not like, well, you're just this abusive, evil monster.
And I will say, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. I was done.
So I will say that even in our field, that is something that as we've kind of worked towards as we've grown and learned more about the trauma. We obviously recognize the trauma in the survivor earlier, but it was like, well, we've got to start working from the offender from that perspective too. Because when I first started working in this, it was more, it was very accountability based, which again is good and needed. But to the point where it was really, I felt like it was shaming at times, which I was never on board with. And anybody who's done offender work, they will tell you we're moving well away from that, because that does not foster change. We want to hold him accountable, but we also want to provide him support. Let's break down some of this trauma stuff. Let's give you resources and new ways. I mean, the program I supervise is NOVA, New Options for Violent Actions. We're going to give you some tools to recognize some things, recognize your triggers, recognize your abusive behavior, and make some different choices for your relationship, and what is a healthy relationship versus what you have seen. There's so many times where I'm working with offenders, like, we're talking about healthy relationships. And I remember specifically one guy was like, Donavan, like, but no, for real. like you'd never say anything to your wife, like call her a name. And I'm like, no. And, when we're talking about and just you guys gave a great example of how you handle the money. And we'll talk about things like that and give an example like that of how is a partnership. And some of them are just like, you're speaking a foreign language because my parents didn't do that.
That's not what they were given an example of. So they're just replaying what they saw growing up, and that's normal to them. Oh, this is how you live life. This is how you be a husband or whatever. You control everything, and she has to do what you say. This is what submission really looks like. And
absolutely.
I'm sure that's a big word thrown around.
That's a big one that has come up from a lot of our Christian clients or the religion, the twisted view of Ephesians 5. And so they'll talk about, well, she's supposed to submit to me. I've heard that several times. The Bible says she's supposed to submit to me. And I'm like, and what does the verse after that say? What is that really talking about? And then I, talk about how it's actually a mutual submission that you're serving each other. And that's what the whole thing is saying. But a lot of times when I would ask that, what does the verse after that say? They don't know.
Yeah. They've only ever heard the first part.
When I used to do the groups, in my management role, I don't do the groups like I used to. I'd do more case advisement and stuff like that. But when I used to facilitate the groups, when that would come up, I'd become kind of famous for addressing it in the group. And so, and the groups are open-ended. So, it's a 26-week program. Some guys are at week 1, week 18, they're at different places.
Yeah.
So I remember the guy would say, well, the Bible says my wife is supposed to submit to me. And the other guys would go like, oh, you should not have said that.
Donovan's going to be on a roll now.
And and so then I would kind of lovingly lied into them, but
but I'm sure the guys that have been there a while, it's like really getting ingrained in them by that point. Like,
exactly.
They will never be able to forget. Which, can we just say what that next verse is in case there's somebody listening who's like, I don't know what the next verse is.
Well, it talks about how wives are supposed to love their husbands as Christ loved the church, which basically he gave his life for the church. He sacrificed himself for the church. So it's again, the whole thing is a mutual submission.
Yeah, wives submit, husbands love your wives, and it really. When we worked in ministry up in the mountains, North Carolina, our director, when he would teach marriage seminars, he would talk about that. Same thing, because he had men and women come in for counseling. The men would say the same thing, and he's like, "What does it say next?" Yeah, and they'd be like, "Oh, I don't know." And he's like, "Love your wife the way that Christ loves the church. Cover her."
Right.
And he was like, what woman wouldn't submit to a man who loves her that way? And it's like, that is so true. That is so true. What woman wouldn't submit genuinely to a man who's loving her and covering her in such a kind and also strong, and genuinely, a healthy, strong way? It's like,
well, if you think about the relationship with the Trinity of God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, they all have different roles, but they all are equal. Yeah. And they really, Christ's whole ministry was about serving others and how we do that. And that's the relationship that they have. They really kind of serve each other in different, and it's not you're higher than me, we're equal, but separate. And so, and I believe marriage is the other example. It's a reflection of that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, that's really good. I know we've covered a lot, and as you mentioned before, these situations are all very messy. And as friends of somebody that may be going through this, or as an outside observer, you want to be able to be helpful. You want to provide tangible things. And you mentioned that people aren't, oftentimes they're not ready till they're ready, and you can't make them do anything. But there are also times where, as an outside person that is trying to help, where the best thing for you to do is to take a step back because of the drama cyclone that can happen. And what does that look like? What's your advice for somebody that may be seeing something that they're actually being pulled in a lot more than what am I trying to say here? They're being pulled in to the entire situation a lot, but there's no change and everything continues to happen, but they keep getting asked to be a part of this thing. What kind of advice would you give to a person that's in that kind of situation as an observer and as a friend that keeps being pulled into a situation where there seems to be no end or change in sight?
Well, I think it's interesting. I was actually talking to someone in Australia. It was a church that was trying to work with this couple, and interesting case, but where I really felt like the woman was the abuser. I didn't think it was him. I thought it was her. And everything he was telling me, they had identified. And I'm sorry to go off on a little tangent, just quick sidebar. But when I'm talking about those statistics as an overwhelmingly male, sometimes because of that, we will automatically go to, or generally speaking, people will go to, well, he's the offender. Assume he's the offender. And this church had done that.
Wow.
And they didn't really know anything about domestic violence. They knew that's what was going on, but didn't really know like how to deal with that. And so the more he was talking, I'm like, I got to be honest with you. I think it's her. I think she's the offender. And anyway, there's some just dynamics that led me to that conclusion. But ultimately what I advise them is like, you've got to connect with the resources. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You can provide, here's some resources. It really does come down to their decision if they're going to do it. But I can't really help you anymore, which is what I advise this church at this point. Like, you've done everything that you can, and really there are other people that are specialized this like me.
Right.
These resources are around. That's who you need to contact. That's who you need to partner with and refer them there. And it's like, I can't really, this is kind of out of my area, but there are people that are trained in this like myself who they will be able to help you and assist you if you really want it. But, you have to make that decision yourself. So, yeah.
Can I also ask, so you just mentioned again, like how it's majority men are the offenders, but there is a small percentage where it's the women. I've just been thinking off and on throughout this conversation. Is there anything that you would say to the men who are the survivors that my thought, I don't know if this is true or not, my thought or assumption as to why maybe the men wouldn't go for help, and maybe it's just the same reasons you said for the women too, but is there an element of like, well, I'm not manly enough if I go for help? Like, is there or is it appropriate to like encourage them if you see this happening, be like, you're still a man, like it doesn't make you less of a man.
No, it doesn't, not at all,
that you're being subjected to something like this. How would you encourage men in that situation?
Well, I think you summed it up well. It's not, you're not any less of a man if you do that. And again, safety is paramount. So if you're unsafe, if you feel unsafe, and I will say a lot of times one of the dynamics with female offenders is they can be more violent. And one things we've seen and I know some survivors are going to be like freaking out that I said this. So let me back up and just say men can be very violent, and DV offenders I understand that they're very violent. And I'm not saying the women are more violent than men, or the female offenders are more violent than men.
Can they escalate faster?
But I would say that, so here's a dynamic that was shared with the people who co-facilitate one of our women's groups, and they've been working with women for a long time. Actually, they're both women, and they work with survivors, and they've worked with offenders as well. And but one of the things that they shared is like in the female group where versus the male group where I talked about the denial, the minimizing, the blaming, all that stuff is, which all of that is behavior to justify to themselves what I'm doing. One of the dynamics that has popped up in the female group is like, it's basically like, yeah, I cut him, I'll cut him again. And it's like, yeah, girl, high-fiving, like, look how I got him. And it's like, no, let's back this up and talk about this. And I know that there's a whole area of, we're talking about women who use force. versus there's discussion around like it's not, the dynamics are different, that she doesn't use power and control in the same way that he does because she doesn't have that kind of power. So, she will leverage things by, using a weapon or pulling a knife or something she can grab around the house. And and this is where with women it gets tricky too, is like, is she fighting back? Is she protecting herself? Or is she using violence towards him? Now, I will argue, and maybe not everybody agrees with me on this, but I will argue that I have seen the same power and control tactics with women who abuse men just as well as men who abuse women. They may look a little different, but to say that it's not there, and I'll give you a fine case example. We had a female client, and there's a cost to our program. All these programs charge, most of them do, across the country. Some are free, but that's pretty rare. Anyway, and at the time we were only taking money orders. This was several years ago. And she asked her victim, who's the male, to bring her money order to pay for her offender program to the site because she had to pay that night. He came in, and what was reported to me by the staff person is like, Donovan, I saw him stand there and wait for her to give him permission to put that money order where it was supposed to go.
Wow.
And so I don't necessarily agree with I understand the whole women use force thing, but to say that they don't have some of those power and control tactics, I don't agree with that. Sorry. I know there's some offender people out there who disagree with me.
Women can be manipulative
that's
too.
Okay, but they can be very manipulative, and women can.
Yeah.
Like I said, it looks different. It looks a little different. But I mean, we've heard, there was a woman who cut her husband's kneecap so he couldn't get to the phone to call 911.
Oh.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's like, so yes, women can be abusive.
Yeah.
Not as frequent, not as common, but absolutely they can. Yeah.
Man. Well, we're located here in Charlotte, and so if there's someone listening that's local, and then we're gonna put a lot of things into the show notes with links for things.
Yeah.
I would love to get that power and control wheel if there's something online that I can link for that as well, just so we can put as many resources into the show notes and description of this episode as possible. But if there's somebody listening and they're having the realization, oh, I think that this is the situation that I'm in,
right,
and I need to get out, what are some of the first resources that they can go to, whether they're here locally or where you can point them to for their local government? Or
I would say, or here in the United States, there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and you can Google that. And the nice thing about that site and a lot of other sites is they have like a quick exit button that you can, like, if the offender is around and you're on that site, you can click exit and it goes to a straight blank Google page. So, and a lot of those, that's a safety feature, but that's a place where you can get resources, and they can tell you about local resources where you are.
Yeah.
So I would say that would be the one I would start with.
Yeah. And you gave me that number before we got started. If you need to call that number, it's 1-800-799-7233. And then you can also text BEGIN, that's BEGIN, to 88788. So you have two options. You can call, or there's a text option, or you can go online. We'll put all that link below as well. And then I think you were going to share about some Charlotte local specifics.
Yeah. So the department that I work with is Mecklenburg County. And so that's the county Charlotte is in, obviously. So the department that I work for is Community Support Services. And one of the divisions that I work with is prevention intervention. We also have Service of Homeless and veterans, but the prevention intervention services division is where all the domestic violence resources are. So there's programs for survivors, for child witnesses, for teen dating violence, which is a whole other topic, but a lot of the dynamics are similar, but that it does occur in teen relationships too. and there's and for the offender, the program that I supervise. So all those are in Mecklenburg County. The offender program is the only one that has a cost to it. The rest are completely free.
Wow. Okay.
So it's free of charge. The reason that we charge is because back when these programs were established, offender programs, it was the thought at the time was that they have to be accountable in some other, in not only accountable for their violence, but there has to be like a monetary accountability.
Mm-hmm.
So now, as we've progressed along, we don't really necessarily believe that matters, because there's a lot of offenders who make great progress in programs that don't have a cost. Ours is very low because we're county funded. Most programs are like mine are private nonprofit, so they rely on those client fees too. But that's the reason they have a fee. But all of our other services are free. There's also a agency that we partner with called Safe Alliance, and Safe Alliance that's where the battered women's shelter. That's who that operates that. They also have a program called Victims Assistance, which is a great program that they will go to court with a survivor to help them get a 50B, which is the legal term for a restraining order, domestic violence protective order. And they can't represent them in court, but they will help them, organize their idea, everything that they need to say. So when they go to court, because court can be very intimidating, and especially if you think about a survivor, I'm already afraid he's going to be, first they go, I'll just say this real quick. First they go for an ex parte, which is a 10-day order without him present. So he served that, and then they go back for a 1 year. But victims assistance helps them with all that, because again, the court can be intimidating. How do I kind of approach the judge and all this? So they'll help them with that, and they'll actually go into the courtroom with them and sit with them. And again, they can't represent them like an attorney would, but
it gives them that even like emotional support.
Absolutely.
I have somebody on my team.
Yeah.
In my corner.
Absolutely.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that's the other agency. And obviously, what we always tell people, like, if you're in danger, don't call us. We're therapists. We can't help you. Call someone who can arrest this person. So call 911. And a lot of times if you call our main lines, you'll say, if this is an emergency, hang up and call 911. Otherwise, let's connect you to, whatever service it is. But your police department is a great resource for you. And I want to also say Child Protective Services in your area. A lot of times Child Protective Services, there is a big myth about them that they come in and take your kids. That is actually not what they do. Their whole focus actually is family reunification and keeping the family together. So they're not going to come in and just take your kids. What they'll do is come in and create, if there is a domestic violence situation, which majority of the cases, from what I understand, that they work with is domestic violence, because again, it's very widespread. And so they're coming in to create a case plan. So they're going to refer her to our victim services and him to my offender services. So they're going to try to create a plan to keep you guys together, to get everybody help they need. They don't just come in and take kids. In fact, it's a whole long process before they do that. So they're actually a very good resource. I know they get painted as the villain a lot, but they're actually a very great resource to utilize.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming to share with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Do you have any other questions or thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I learned a ton today, so
good.
Thanks for coming,
you're
Donovan.
welcome.
Seriously, you are
Thank you for having me. This
a
is so
wealth
fun.
of information and insight, and just, we appreciate that. We love that we're related to you, but we appreciate you coming today and just pouring into us and, anyone who's listening, and just, I think also just giving people hope too.
Good.
Like,
thank you. I hope I did.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Nobody's alone.
Yeah.
Everybody is worthy of being safe and loved well.
Right.
And there are resources available to help keep people together and restore relationships.
Yes.
And those are key for people to go and live full, well, and whole lives.
Yes, and that can happen. I've seen that. I could not do what I do if I didn't see that. I see offenders change all the time, and relationships restored. So it's possible.
I mean, that's really encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, hey, we're going to wrap it up with a question. Okay. One thing that we do on every single episode is that we just have this stack of cards here that we have. And we just do this as a part of, if you're new to the show, we do this to help just promote conversation. We like having conversations that are just part of promoting conversation and connectivity. And so I'm going to pull this guy right here.
And it's just fun. Most of the time. Sometimes it's sappy questions. Hopefully this isn't sappy because we've got Donavan. But
all right. Okay.
Well, and part of it too is that we end up with like a heavy topic like this. It's nice to have something that kind of, lightens things up at the end, which this one is, what is your ideal retirement lifestyle?
Oh,
wow.
That's
my ideal retirement lifestyle. I think one where it's going to sound boring to a certain degree, but just where I do whatever I want.
It's your ideal lifestyle. It doesn't matter.
I heard somebody say that was retired. I think it was a former police officer. It was like every day Saturday. And that's great. And I was like, I want every day to be Saturday. And of course, I'd like to travel and,
but that's part of doing whatever you want.
Yeah.
Just we're going to go out of town for the weekend. Yeah. Or the week. Or the
whatever.
Month. Who knows?
Every day's Saturday, so I can do that.
Yeah, what's today?
I don't have any obligations.
Saturday.
You're going to have a watch that's just Donavan has a watch collection, by the way.
Yeah,
so we need to get him a watch. When you retire.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll remember this down the road. When you retire, we'll just get you a watch that just is programmed to Saturday every day
Saturday. Yeah. Perfect.
What about you, babe?
Awesome. My ideal retirement lifestyle, it's probably going to be what you think it is, which is probably going to be having enough land that I can just hang out and explore and go hunt whenever I want, and enough money to be able to just go travel where I want to. Honestly, go hunt where I want to. Go to shows.
Yeah.
I think sounds good to me. Hunting, fishing, loving it every day.
There you go.
Okay, that totally fits you and that makes sense, but honestly, it's not what I thought you were
going
to say.
What did you think it was going to be?
The thing that he always tells me is, I guess you do talk about that sometimes too, but the thing that he always says is like, man, the best thing I think I would love to do during retirement, like if I wanted to just get another job, because this man cannot sit still. Like you know him. He cannot sit still.
I have that problem as well.
And so which is not a bad thing, but like he loves having something to do.
It's easier when you're this age. When you get my age, it starts. Like I'm tired. I'm tired now.
He said, I cannot count how many times you have told me you want to work at Disney World and be the taxi boat driver.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Would be a pretty sweet job.
Which we were just recently all at Disney together and had plenty of those boat rides.
Yeah.
And they are fun.
They are fun.
And sometimes those boat drivers are, what's their technical term? Are they captains? What are they?
Yeah,
sometimes they're fun.
I would say I'm a captain if I was in that position, because that just sounds fun.
I guess it wasn't prompted in my brain because it was like, what's your ideal retirement lifestyle? And I just want to go hang out and hunt. But I've always said my ideal retirement job would be to be a water taxi captain.
That's what they're called. Water taxi.
Boat
taxi. Water taxi.
So,
which I always say no, because I don't want to live in Florida. But that would be fun.
Steamboat Willie over here.
Yeah, I know. But captain's still in the title. So
captain's still in the title.
So that's good. Yeah.
What's your ideal retirement lifestyle, babe?
I guess not too far up, other than the hunting part. I don't mind if you hunt. I'm just don't care to get up at 4 a.m. and go sit silently in the woods for hours at a time.
I'm with you on that. Yeah. I don't want to get up at 4 a.m. to do anything. There was
with you on that.
There was golf trip that some of the guys did, and your other uncle said, "I'm sorry I didn't invite you to that." I'm like, "That's okay, because I heard what time you guys were getting up, and I wouldn't have done it anyway."
They said they got up.
You're on vacation. You're getting up. No,
absolutely not.
The only time to get up early on vacation is if you're going to go rope drop a park.
Even then, I question it. I was seriously
me too. I'm
struggling.
Like, no.
I was like, do I really want to get up at 6 a.m. to go be at Animal Kingdom at 7?
Yeah.
I did it anyway, but I was like,
Which I gotta say, I have done that.
Do it begrudgingly.
Yeah. But I've always done it begrudgingly. Yes, yeah. I've never. Like,
we're not alone.
I'm doing this for other people, not really, because if it were up to me, I'll just be going late. Like, who cares about the extra magic hours or whatever?
Just show up at lunch.
Look,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I thought, well, at least maybe part of the perk of going early, even though I don't want to, is that, you know, maybe it'll be because it's Florida, freaking Orlando in June. I'm like, maybe it'll be slightly cooler at 7:30. No, it's just as hot and muggy.
No.
You're not saving yourself any trouble. No. The sun is already up. It's disgusting outside. Okay, that's my rant. Sorry.
I'm sweaty.
Yeah. Anyway, to fully answer that question, similar to yours, minus the hunting part for me personally, but just to be around and available for my kids and their families. Get to play with grandkids. Yes, travel would be nice and fun. But yeah, being a grandma would be fun.
I imagine you'll desire a really nice reading nook.
Oh yeah,
a library.
Oh yeah,
in our
that'd be
dream home.
Yeah, yeah.
Lisa and I can just hang out and read books all the time.
Yeah. I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, fun. Well, hey, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and joining this episode of the Intentional Life podcast. We hope that it was helpful, that it was encouraging and hopeful. Again, we'll put all the links to the resources that we talked about in this episode in the show notes and description. Thank you, Donavan, for coming and joining us, and just for all the work that you do in helping bring restoration to families and marriages.
Thank you, guys.
It's important work. And so we're grateful for you and the work that you do and the teams that you work with.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you again for having me.
Oh, for sure.
To be your first guest.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Be sure to go find us on social media, The Intentional Life Pod. Again, I'm AJ Selby. This is my wife, Amy Selby. Thanks for joining us.